Harrison, you're an excellent song leader. You did a very good job. I appreciate the fact that you know all the new songs as well as the golden oldies. And you combined them. So that's a good job. I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you. Welcome to all you are here. Appreciate you all being here. It's good to see you all. And I hope that this week will be a good week for us all. Any time we can start our week by worshiping God, it's going to be a good one. And so I pray that this week will be a blessing to you as we try to live our lives serving Christ and serving others as well. I want to say, first of all, we got a lot of things going on in our church with outreaches and banquets, and this weekend was the time where we helped at our turn to help at the food pantry, and it's really good. One of the things we mentioned in our Bible class that Cole is teaching is how we are active in the community, and we know each other in the community, and we are glad to be a part of a community, and it's a blessing to know that we are out and about and doing that. So please be paying attention to your bulletin. I know there were some errors and typos, and I apologize for that, and names people got mixed up, but that's okay. We have a lot of things going on, and I appreciate the fact that we're doing all these things. So we want to give you all some encouragement for that as well. One of the statements, I had a hard time figuring how I wanted to start this, because one of the things that I wanted to say was about the book of James is, it's not a very long book. Out of all the books in the Bible, this one, the book of James, is very down to earth. In fact, I had a hard time trying to figure out what scripture I wanted read this morning, and so I chose the first 4 verses of the book of James. But if I had my way and the time frame, I would have had Ike read the entire book. You can't just really pull one verse out of the book of James and say, that's what it's all about. So as we journey, as we go throughout this year, spending some time in the book of James, I'm going to look at the different chapters and different parts of the verse, and as we go along, pull out the things that apply to us as we are working on our faith this year. And so I decided that some of the key verses that we're going to pull out, and then one of the verses we're going to talk about, verses 1 through 4, it helps us get an understanding about what James wants us to understand. The series of the book of James is what I'm going to call a working faith. A working faith. And before we enter into this, I kind of wanted to talk about some personal stuff. I am the last of 4 boys. I have 3 older brothers. And the term cut from a different section of cloth really applies to all of my brothers, including myself. First, there's my oldest brother, Terry. Terry Chrane is a self-employed rancher right now. He he pumps wells too. Terry has been, in the last decade or so, has even more become one of my heroes. Terry is one of the few people to survive a surgery to take out a brain aneurysm. And his story is one that he can tell on his own. But I've always looked up to my oldest brother, Terry. Terry played football. He was a senior when I was in kindergarten. So there's a big, huge difference between him and me, but I could always count on 2 things from Terry. One, if I got really scared, I could go and sleep in his room with him. The only problem was, though, is that in order to do that, I had to take a chew of Red Man. and he tried to deter me from getting in bed with him. But Terry always was one to help me out and protect me and be my friend and help me out. So I learned a lot from Terry. Terry was the one who would always be there for me. And he still is. He still encourages me every day. Then there's my brother Larry. Larry was born with cerebral palsy and spent the large majority of his life confined to a wheelchair or to a bed because physically his body would not work. His mind, though, was as sharp as a tack. His attitude was even better. Back then it was called the Abilene State School. Now it's called Karen the Assisted Living Center or something like, I can't remember what it's called now. But he lived there most of his life. And he lived into his 40s, his late 40s, which says a lot about the care he was given at that assisted living center. Larry always had a positive attitude. He was the most popular kid on campus. And when I was in sports, doing extracurricular activities, doing things that, sometimes it would get hard or difficult or challenging, and I would have those moments that I would feel like I wanted to quit or give up, my mom was ever faithful to bring up to the fact, to look me right in the eye and say, you have a brother who would love nothing better than to run and play football or sing or lead or do things, and he can't. If you're going to do this, you should do it also for Larry. Because to him that has been given much, much should be required of. So I learned a lot from my brother Larry, even though he hardly said a word to me. Even though I hardly got to see him, only maybe a couple of times a year. And when he died, it hurt. I still miss him. Then there's Randy, the one who was closest to me. 7 years difference. Randy was the one who taught me perseverance by picking on me. Randy was the one who would warp me, tickle me, till I couldn't almost control myself. Randy was the one who taught me about wet willies, taught me about Roman candles that can be shot at you. Randy was the one who tried to his best to convince me that I was adopted because I had blonde hair and green eyes, and of course all my brothers were dark-headed and different colored eyes. Randy was the one who would tease me on the bus, make sure that I was the one, that everyone knew that I was the little brother and he was the big brother. And on the school bus there was a pecking order. But then one day, Randy had basketball practice. And another fella decided that there was a pecking order, that I needed to be reminded of that pecking order even though Randy wasn't on the bus. And I got off the bus that day and I was mad. Well, I was hot. I kept my cool in front of my mom and dad, but when I was upstairs, Randy finally looked at me, and Randy had a really good sixth sense about knowing when something was wrong. And he said, "What is wrong with you?" And I told him. And he said, "Okay, we'll take care of that in the morning." We get on the bus. The guy gets on the bus and quickly is brought up to me by my brother with my brother's big giant hands wrapped around his collar. And is told, "You will apologize to my little brother because no one picks on Blan except me. And if you don't, I'm going to squeeze you out this bus window." Y'all know how big the bus windows are. So, I learned that through Randy that family is important. Family was important. Now, I say all that, and I talk about all that, because it's important for us to understand James. It's important for us to understand James because in order for us to understand James, we've got to understand the book of James was written by James, the brother of Jesus. Now, it doesn't sound that way. In verse 1 of James, he describes himself not as anything other than one thing. James chapter, and as we get into that verse, the verses I'm going to talk about for sure are verses 2 and 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that in the testing of your faith develops perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. But however, in James, the first verse he introduces himself as James, a servant of God and of our Lord Jesus Christ. James' journey of faith is a faith lesson for us all. From back early when, in John chapter 7, verses 3 through 5, we learn that James, along with his other brothers, did not believe who Jesus claimed about himself. It even appears that James was among those who sought Jesus out and wanted to end his public ministry. In fact, in Mark chapter 3, verses 20 through 21, probably one of my favorite verses in the Bible, it says, Jesus had entered a house, and again a crowd gathered so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. And then it says, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. So James, early in life, had an opinion, but then it changed. See, altogether, the different pictures of James are being painted, and he really shines in the book of Acts and the new letters. The events that occurred in his life thoroughly took him to a different level, changed him for all there was. The events in James's life transformed him from a doubter to a disciple. And the events that had been post, and especially the events that were post-resurrection. The Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians 15:7 that Jesus appeared to James and the others. This appearance must have dissolved his doubt altogether. The reservations about who Jesus claims that he was the Messiah, the Son of God. And so immediate was the change of heart, that he is, in fact, numbered among the believers in the book of Acts, starting in Acts chapter 1, verse 14, where it says, they all joined together, constantly in prayer, and along with women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. And so from this point, James becomes a leading figure in the church. If you'll remember when Peter gets caught and he's put in prison, and he is released by the angels, and he runs to rejoin the body of believers that are at Mary's house, Mary, the mother of John Mark. And so after he has a hard time getting in the front door, but after he gets in, he tells them all the events and how it took place. And then he says in Acts chapter 12, verse 17, he says, make sure you tell James and the brothers about how I got out of prison. When the apostles and the elders meet to discuss the question of what do we do with the Gentiles being admitted to the church, it was James in Acts chapter 15, verse 13, who made a very definitive statement about the matter. But it doesn't end there. Paul reports his labors to James as he returns from his third missionary journey in Acts 21:18. Paul also refers to James as one of the pillars of the church in Jerusalem in Galatians chapter 2, verse 9. Non-biblical history tells us that James was also known as James the Just. And many times, many church historians write how James, his knees were so calloused because he spent many of his days on his knees in prayer, that his knees became so calloused that they looked like the knees of camels because he spent so much time praying. It's amazing that the differences of a living faith made in the life of James. James had grown up. Can you imagine being the little brother to Jesus? I mean, we talk about how difficult it must have been for Joseph to be Jesus' father and Mary to be Jesus' mother. But can you imagine some of the conversations that could have happened and went on? Here's Jesus, the oldest brother. Everybody looks up to the older brothers, especially the younger ones. If one of my brothers went off the reservation, if we could say, and started acting crazy and nut, I would be very, very concerned about him. When my brothers get sick, you get concerned. When they do things that are not. When Randy, my brother, decided to move to Virginia, we were like, what is going on? When Terry had his surgery, what's going on? James probably witnessed everything that happened in Christ. He witnessed that sinful life of Jesus and the teachings. He had been one of the unbelievers of Jesus until he witnessed the resurrected Lord. And so of all the things, of all the ways that James could identify himself, he could have said, I am James, the brother of Jesus. What does he do? He introduces himself as the servant of God, the Lord Jesus Christ. And that statement is very evident of his humility and his recognition that his spiritual relationship to Jesus is far more important than his physical one. And it's a lesson for us as well. Me and Al Jolly were talking about this the other day. And the idea of love and how we love our spouse and we love our family and we love our kids. And I told him that one time when I was a young man, I was messing around and I was saying, Mama, do you love me? Oh, yeah, honey, you know I love you. And I said, Mama, you love me more than you love Terry and Randy, right? Oh, yeah, honey, that's right. Mama, you love me more than you love Daddy. And she goes, well, I've been married to your daddy a long time, Blan. My mom said, I love him, but I really love you. And then I spat it off and I said, Mama, you love me more than God, don't you? And she looked at me, and I knew instantly that the conversation got serious. Not because she got mad, but she looked me straight in the eye. And she said, darling, it's because I love God, I can love you. James had to have understood that. Which is why our Christian life is far more important than our physical one. Our love for each other is elevated. Because why? Because we love Christ. He could have easily identified himself as any other person. Instead, he chose to identify himself as a servant. This letter is a letter that is faith strengthening. It's a faith strengthening letter. In the New Testament, this letter was written to a specific people with a definite purpose in mind. Now, James did not think that he was going to write 5 chapters in a great book that was going to become the Bible. No, James was writing a letter to people who he felt a personal responsibility for. And so how does he write it? James talks to them as much as like a father would talk to his children with both authority and love. And yes, it is suggested that this might be addressed, this letter in general, might be addressed to Christians in general. But, in my opinion, both Jews and Gentiles, it is more likely that it can be read that way, but it is more likely that this letter was written to the Jewish Christians who had just been forced to flee Jerusalem. And those Christians, that church, that congregation, James was personally concerned about. You see, the reader likely, the readers would have been the 12 tribes scattered amongst the nation in verse 1. And so it's with this intense persecution, it's when this intense persecution breaks out, they become worried, frightened, afraid. You can read about it in Acts chapter 8 and Acts chapter 12. And so here are these Christians living in Jerusalem all their life, and now they're forced to leave. And the teacher, the spiritual teacher, the spiritual leader of that congregation, the counselor, they're having to leave him as well. And so now they're separated from him, and the pain had to be very hard. I know there are many of you out there amongst you who served in World War II, and also have men and women who are served in the military. Many of you know how important those letters from home were, and how excited it would have been to get that letter or to get that email. And how even doubly excited it would have been for those who were back here at home receiving a letter from someone overseas who had been in the military. It had to be the same way. It had to be the same way. Look how he starts. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Translation, you are going to be tested as a Christian. And as long as you know that, that is half the battle. Yes, the Christian life does have peace, and the Christian life does have mercy, and the Christian life does have hope and faith and everything else. But you got to know this going in, there also will be trials. And there's going to be trouble. But we rejoice with those. Why? Because our faith develops through perseverance. See, James knew that these trials of these saints, he knew what they were going through. And he wanted to help them. So he writes a letter to strengthen their faith, to increase their courage, to warn them against the spiritual indifferences. We can only imagine the excitement of which these letters were received. Getting a letter from someone who you've always looked up to, getting an email, a note, a text message from someone you haven't heard from in a while, it always excites you. These people had to feel that same way. Now, we can read the book of James today with equal enthusiasm and equal interest because this book, like I said before, it is so down to earth. It's so sensible. We're going to discover how this book tells us how we can conform our attitudes, we can change our speech, we can change our behavior, and we all change it according to the will of God so that we can be a light to the world and we can be salt to the earth. This letter is going to show us how Christianity is a faith that works. A faith that works. So, as we go through this book, I'm going to preach on James one more time this month to kind of get caught up. February I had some guest speakers and things like that, so I kind of got off schedule a little bit. I'm going to preach on James one more time this month. I'm asking you to do me a favor. I want to encourage you to read the entire letter of James once this month. Trust me, it only takes about 20 minutes. I also would like to encourage you to join me in praying. Praying that God will help us learn these great truths that we're going to discover this entire year. Not only from James, but from Abraham and from Matthew chapter 6 and chapter 7. And most importantly, join me in doing something that's so down to earth, something that's so simple. Join me in looking for daily opportunities that you can practice your faith. We've already done so this year. Last Sunday, we raised over $2,000 to help phase 3 of the solar-powered players. The advertisement, this has not even been talked about yet. Many churches don't even know about phase 3. They know it's coming, but they don't know the details. We were early. And they already have $2,000 to get a jump and a start on phase 3 of putting players, audio players in Mexico, in South America. But that's just one thing. Daily opportunities to practice your faith means we're gonna work at the food pantry. We're gonna work at the outreach. We're gonna honor our senior singles with a Valentine's banquet. We're going to see each other in the supermarket and say, hey, how you doing? How's your week going? And mean it. And when I say mean it, we want to know how their week's going. We're going to check up upon the people who have just got out of hospitals with surgeries and say, hey, how you doing? Can I bring you anything? We're going to go see those people in the nursing home. Tell them that we love them. And pray that they have peace and comfortable, restless nights and peaceful days. We're going to see each other in church, and we're going to see that their faces are down or they're not feeling really good, and we're going to love on them and say, I don't know what's going on, but I love you, brother. I love you, sister. This is how we activate our faith. This is how we make faith work. And I only want you to join me and continue to do what you're doing, because it's showing. It's showing. Today, if there's someone here who would like to respond to the invitation, the time is now. If you would like to have the prayers of the church, if you decide that today's the day you want to become a Christian, whatever way we can help you, please come forward as we stand and as we sing.